this is a prime opportunity to demonstrate to policymakers why extension is so important. And by that I mean, y'all had your normal capacity funding out there, you know, that you're using just to do your everyday things. And I am certain there is some of that that has been readjusted to do direct COVID responses, whether it is, you know, doing extension on, you know, how to do masks, whether it is some type of drive to ensure that healthcare providers have masks. All these little niches, things that you're doing in response need to be documented. That's the justification. Those are things that when we go back to the policymakers and we say, hey, we need money for this because this is what we've been spending it on. Thank goodness we had this and we had it in the way that we have it so that we can respond. And with that, I'll stop.
Thank you, Vernie. I really like what you concluded on, and a lot of us are adapting, and as you said, Vernie and Doug, using our capacity funds and using it in a different way to meet some of the K through 12 needs through some of our STEM and 4-H programming with kids now at home. Certainly an opportunity to reach a new audience, but really provide a critical need. I also think we would all agree that some of the health and wellness programs are going to continue to grow in importance in our communities that we deliver. Mental health certainly being one. We've adapted a lot of our youth programming in this new climate. I guess my question and getting back to answering the why and being able to demonstrate what we're doing across the United States and different states, is there a plan or do we have something in place to be able to capture our new programming techniques and avenues that we've utilized to be able to really capture that, to be able to articulate that to the policymakers at a national level?
Well, Ron was the one that I think initiated this for the Southern region. And so we're without an evaluation specialist at Oklahoma State right now, but I do hope that we can catalog some of the things that are going on. I don't know that we have other than through our evaluation specialists, I don't know that we individually have a method of kind of capturing these things, but I'm hopeful that with the support of the Program and Staff Development in the Southern Region Committee that we can put something in place or at least gather a variety of information that we can catalog.
I think in light of everything that's going on, many of us moving to using technology to a much higher level, utilizing online learning presents a great opportunity. It also shows responsiveness of what Extension is doing around the country. Everything related to health literacy, health education, mental health issues related to what we're dealing with COVID-19 presents a great opportunity. Economic disparities and economic needs that we can follow up on in Extension are huge, and this cuts across rural and urban areas. Here in our state, Florida, ag impacts are huge right now. And in case you don't know, a lot of our agriculture production is being pushed out right at this point in time. And because we're having issues with labor, we have a lot of crops that are being left in the field, not able to be harvested. There's also issues with sanitation, hygiene, following up with FSMA requirements and a host of other things. And so this is being devastating to our ag producers in rural areas. So that's expanding and compounding the issues that we see here in this state with COVID-19. And we're certainly up to our eyeballs in that. And a lot of things that we are doing and need to do with Extension.
Rick, if you could kind of update us on the current status of the extension proposal, perhaps that does tie into some funding opportunities, position extension to deal with some of the challenges that we're all dealing with, getting information out and helping our clientele through the current situation, but perhaps also an opportunity. And I guess I would, encourage us to try to look for an avenue or opportunity that we could actually get our hands around how extension as a whole is dealing with and making a positive difference in this current environment, perhaps would position us well moving forward. So Rick, kind of turn it to you.
The proposal's history started basically with a retired extension director who relocated far south in the great state that Vernie Hubert is from, Texas, working with E-Extension Foundation, particularly Chris Geith and Karan Gala, who is working jointly with the government affairs folks and VAA in APOU. And I came on board and kept that linkage strong with ECOP Exec Committee, ECOP, and ECOP BLC to develop a proposal, I think, that kind of tries to hit at many of the pieces that Vernie was talking about here, about how does this proposal, if it moves forward into Supplemental 4, how can that help address the emerging needs related to COVID-19 and the doubling down. I think that the difficulty of this is, and what I've heard, when E-Extension has convened large numbers of county educators across the country, and I suspect you all in the states and your institutions are hearing the same thing, there's a very basic level of response right now. This is not about maintaining ongoing programs. This is about how do you address those emerging issues that are coming with kids at home through our 4-H positive youth development programs. Huge demand for those programs. Interesting but not surprising interest in Master Gardener programs that have come out. Huge interest in collaborating with local and state agencies around health and wellness, nutrition, and most practically important, emergency government. How that's putting together, how we are engaged with Eden to help build that capacity across the country. Yet the challenge is, like we've seen every time else, that people want to use extension as a device for information dissemination. We are asking fully employed and now displaced colleagues around the country to provide an important role for us. And I think the nature of this supplemental funding was, how do you basically leverage, as I indicated here, that capacity funding that has been so important to us, levered by state and local funding, through our counties, parishes, and boroughs to be able to meet this increased demand and in a new environment. At this point, the proposal does not probably have, how do we collect? It doesn't require, no offense to the evaluation specialist or online, this does not require a major evaluation effort. This requires anecdotal at this point evidence. How are your colleagues across the country addressing issues that have emerged with COVID-19? What are we doing that enhances the communities in which we live in across the country, both in rural and urban areas? How can we use these dollars to do that better so that we can have that kind of impact? And frankly, it's not only a response issue, it's a recovery issue. At some point, there is a major challenge on the recovery effort side. Despite the last couple of days' moves of the stock market in response to any sort of evidence that COVID-19 is starting to level off, the reality is there's millions of people impacted by this, practically millions of small businesses, practically all farmers, particularly those that are in the produce sector. I think, Nick, you made a good point that if you look across the southern and western parts of this country where produce is being produced and we no longer have the institutional buyers, schools are shut down, lots of businesses are shut down, obviously restaurants are shut down. If you go to your grocery store, you don't see a whole lot of shortages yet with respect to your produce section because they're swamped. I think that's another issue that we need to talk about. How do we working with communities, health and wellness? So at this point, we are working collaboratively. Yesterday, the Budget Ledge Committee did an electronic ballot. There's unanimous vote yes to move this on, this proposal to the BAC, so we have the endorsement of APLU along with what comes out of the experiment stations to move forward as part of the conversation around Supplemental 4. Doing in each of the regions, trying to gather that kind of information, particularly, Vernie, in our newly defined blessed states, those now that are part of the appropriations committees, more so than just the ag appropriation subcommittees or the budget committees, I should say, in the Senate and House, to build that case for 65 up to $80 million of our ask of the proposal. I hope once we get to equilibrium or where this proposal is and what pathway we're talking about, that we will be sharing information across the section. We are very cognizant about this notion of Smith-Weaver funding, on the one hand, being not a really good mechanism, not aligned well with population dense states like New Jersey, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, for instance. And how do we actually address that issue? On the other hand, making sure that we're able to invest wisely in states that have the capacity to do it. Age-old problem, probably not solving that allocation problem in the short run, but we want to make sure that we are providing enough dollars to those population-dense smaller states to be able to develop the kind of programming they need. So that's all in the conversation as well. And that's basically where we are. I can answer questions at this point, but I do think, as Vernie and Doug have both pointed out, what a great opportunity to be able to demonstrate the value of extension, a community-based system of programming across the country in a way that aggregates into a national value. The closer we are to decision makers, the better we are at communicating value. We communicate value really well locally because, you know, we live and work in those counties or multi-counties where the decision makers are located. We're pretty good on the state side, but we still suffer at the federal side. And some of that's just simply because of the county or local centric nature of the programming we do, so that even in adjacent counties, our programming could be looking different. And one of the challenges that we're having here is to be able to aggregate that up into some sort of message that really conveys value well. I think all the pieces are there, and I think this is going to provide us an opportunity to get that done. So John, I turn it back to you.
As you've been talking, Rick, it occurred to me that one of the things we ought to consider is we have, at the national level, in our ECOP funding, we have some carryover funds that we haven't used over the last couple of years for a number of reasons. One possibility is, why don't we hire somebody to actually do the collection of data for us around the way we have utilized capacity funds in order to respond to COVID-19. That's just one suggestion, but it would be one way to collect that information in a relatively quick way, and have one person sort of assigned, hired, in fact, to do that. And so it seems that's just one idea for doing that. We can help through the kinds of efforts that Ron has initiated in the other regions as well, but in reality, every single director is absolutely slammed by trying to figure out how to help their people stay together, keep moving, do the right things, and so on. And so I'm finding a very limited amount of bandwidth, if you will, for directors to respond to me around things like that. But if we had somebody hired to, in fact, collect that data for us, that might be ultimately more efficient for us. So that's one thought. A second is, I'm wondering if, along with 80,000 or 65,000 or whatever, a proposal that's going forward, we shouldn't also advance a proposal around, just simply around capacity funds. Increase capacity funds by 20%. In order to, build the capacity to not only continue to respond to COVID-19, but also to look at the recovery phase, and then begin to look at some real areas around which we want to focus those funds. For example, I don't know how many of you heard Marshall Stewart in his presentation this morning, but he identified some areas that I think are really important for us to consider. One is around this issue of insecurity, financial insecurity, food insecurity. We deal with those kinds of things. So why not put an emphasis around those? Another is this whole area around K through 12 education. Kids are at home. What partnerships that we can develop are with public television and other, other entities in order to help address this issue of kids being at home. It's not going to be, in fact, I would guess that education in the future is going to change significantly, regardless of whether schools come back into session this summer or in the fall or whatever. There's a role that extension can play in K through 12 education. Another one that he commented on was around rural mental health, rural health in particular, but our health of our people, mental health in particular. And one of the things he commented about was rural businesses and small businesses, and what that does to rural, what the fall of that does to rural communities, and not just to those people who are trying to stay in business, but to the communities themselves. That's an area that we can, in fact, get involved in if we would promote doubling, tripling of the resources that are available for our regional rural development centers, for example. One of the other things, I'll be quiet, but earlier in the PILD program, when Scott Engel was addressing the group, one of the things that he said, and I've heard him say this to us before, is in extension, we are not good at going after a really big, bold, audacious goal. And until we're ready to do that, we're not going to be paid attention to. And he used the NIH mantra of curing cancer as an example. And one of the things he said is nobody expects NIH to cure cancer within the next year or 2 years or even 5 years. But in fact, they put that out there as a mantra and they're working toward it. And he challenged us again in extension to in fact think about those bold, audacious goals, put a stake in the ground and go after them. So those are just some things that are flying around in my head as we've been talking about this, John.
I think those are excellent ideas, Lyla, and I think there's several others that would agree. I know we're getting a little short on time, and our last discussion item was, you know, the need, if the national system could help, and or should it help in messaging senior leadership. But I really don't want to walk away in the final minutes on some of the ideas that you laid out as next steps from a funding standpoint. I guess I'd be interested in other thoughts on Lyla's suggestions. I believe the first one was, you know, the possibility of hiring someone to collect the information and impacts that the states are having by using their capacity funds to address COVID-19 issues. And your second point was possibly another proposal with a large ask for us to continue to deal with the current response, but more importantly, the recovery focuses attention on K-12 education, rural mental health, et cetera, that are going to continue to be great opportunities. So thoughts on those two ideas that Lyla had?
I'm going to address the first one, and that's, while I think it's very important that we gather data and have a mechanism to do so that does not seriously rest upon the director's shoulders at this time, I also think it's really important that we think beyond data to stories, because we've got years and years and years of data showing how with very little resources we can achieve amazing things. But I think sometimes a small collection of stories that people can relate to really bring meaning to some of the facts and figures. So my modification on your suggestion would be that we not think about hiring somebody to collect and organize data, but we look for a communicator, and there are some already within the system who can seek out and distill some stories that won't summarize all we do, but can help people think about the real world impact of small things.
Yeah, very, very good point, Jody, and the importance of personalizing, you know, the impacts through stories. But I do feel that does tie in very well to the first idea that Lyla had, and appreciate that.
This is Marshall Stewart. I think the last couple comments were, I think they're both right. I don't think there's an either or. I do think you need good data, and I think that would make a lot of sense. I also think you need to be able to translate data though into feeling. And so I think it's both of those. So there are people who have the ability to do both. And I think having someone do that, what I think the bigger issue is here, and I want to say this as politically correct as I can, but I'm going to say it. We've got to get the bureaucracy out of the way within extension and within all this stuff we have to allow Doug Steele and others to move rapidly. And I know that when I came on, there was some conversation going on around. Rick and others have been looking at a model to put some teams in place just to move. And if you don't move, you're going to miss it. And that's the thing I want to leave you with, John. And I'm willing to help however I can so that we don't miss this. If we study this thing too long, it's not a time to overstudy. It's a time to figure out a path. And some of us are going to have to bite down hard and just, maybe it won't be exactly what I would do, and that's okay, but seize the moment. And this is a moment, and I appreciate the work that Rick and John, you and Doug and others are doing, trying to figure out a way to get more nimble. We've got to move. Everybody can't be in the conversation when you do these things. And I'm sorry, that sounds like I'm not inclusive. It's not that, but we've got to move. And so, John, I'm going to stop there, and I hope you understand what I'm saying by that. I like inclusivity, but we need a team of people who can sit down, figure this thing out, and go. And so whatever it takes to get that done, and I don't have to be on the team. I don't care about that. I want somebody to feel like they've got the empowerment to go and not deal with, oh, everybody's got to check off and everybody's got to vote. No, do it, because if we don't, we're going to miss it.
Yeah, great point, Marshall, and thank you. I agree with you. My compliment to the team that really moved quick on the current proposal and supplemental 4. I think this kind of conversation really helps put some focus on a smaller group looking for opportunities through ECOP to really be able to articulate as a system how are we responding to COVID-19, to be able to tell our story, but also to move forward. And as you said, Marshall, quickly take advantage of the situation for a potential increase in capacity funds and how we could, as a system, help the country navigate the response and the recovery. Because I think there's going to be some long-term, as we all know, impacts. And I think extension is in a great place to be able to be a solution for many. Maybe I could get some insight from Mark Lattimore as ECOP chair, but I'm certainly committed to taking the conversation that we've gotten today and some of the input and get a small group together to see how can we capitalize on some of the ideas and suggestions from this conversation. And as Marshall said, let's strike while the iron's hot.
John, this is Mark. I see this conversation as an excellent opportunity to really come together and, as been stated, move rapidly as possible into addressing issues that we need to address beyond the proposal that Rick just described. Based on the discussion and the conversation that we just heard, great ideas, great opportunities, and reason they're great ideas and great opportunities because there's a lot of challenges in which we are faced with. So let's take advantage of those. Organization of a committee perspective, we're game. We definitely need to move.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up our. Thank you again, Mark, for your leadership, and thank everyone for their input and suggestions. I think we've got a couple of ideas that are floated from a little over an hour meeting that I think we can capitalize on. We need to use time to our advantage, move quickly. So, Mark, let's have a conversation and how can ECOP BLC best help you and their EDs move on a couple of these ideas, both in the short term and maybe in the long term from a funding and programmatic impact standpoint.
Thank you, John.
With that, I think we'll need to close. I guess what I'd like to leave everyone with is again thanking everybody for their leadership. I know everybody. I know as stated earlier, we're all pretty busy trying to keep everything moving positively forward. I think we're all learning some new ways we can do extension and some new ways that make extension better through all this. I do want you to know the BLC is committed to continue working to try take advantage of the current situation as we move forward. But most importantly, I want to wish everybody to stay safe. Hope everything's going well with your families. Please know to call or shoot me an email following this conversation if you have some other ideas that we need to try to push forward. Give you all the very best wishes, and please don't hesitate to reach out if there's something I can do or you feel like the BLC can do to help the current situation, so as a system we can move forward. So again, thank